The Cotton Club. September 16, 1935. 8:47 p.m. 200 people filling the tables. The stage lights washing everything in amber and gold. The band playing something smooth, something that made you feel like Harlem was the center of the world. And in the middle of that carefully controlled chaos, a man sat alone at a back table, nursing bourbon and watching the show with the kind of stillness that made strong men nervous. His name was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. He was 30 years old. Not tall. Not particularly imposing in the way that movies make gangsters imposing. But there was something about the way he occupied space. The way his hand rested on the table. The angle of his head. It suggested a man who'd learned long ago that power doesn't announce itself. It just waits. The door opened. Dutch Schultz walked through it like he owned the place. Maybe he thought he did. Dutch was a bootlegger from the Bronx, German Jewish, built his empire on prohibition money and an absolute refusal to accept limits. He'd made millions. He'd killed dozens. He'd taken over half of New York's underworld through a combination of violence, money, and something that might have been genius if it wasn't corrupted by contempt. He was flushed red. Expensive whiskey and expensive rage. He saw Bumpy. And instead of doing what powerful men usually do, sending a lieutenant, maintaining distance, preserving the fiction of civility, Dutch stood up from his reserved table near the stage, and he walked. Not casually. Not with any pretense of casualness. He stomped across the club, his bodyguards scrambling to follow, and the conversation in the room died as everyone realized something was about to happen. When he reached Bumpy's table, he didn't lean down. Didn't lower his voice. Didn't maintain the pretense that this was a conversation between criminal equals. He slammed his hand down on the table so hard Bumpy's bourbon glass jumped and spilled across the white tablecloth. "You've got some nerve showing your face in here tonight, boy." The word hung in the air like smoke. "You think you're somebody? You think running a few penny policy banks in Negro Town makes you a real gangster? I've been trying to be reasonable with you people. Trying to give you coloreds a chance to work for me and make something of yourselves. But you're too stupid to understand when somebody's doing you a favor." The entire club had gone silent. Not the quiet of respectful listening. The silence of people who understood they were witnessing something that might end in blood. 200 pairs of eyes on a table in the back. Bumpy didn't stand up. Didn't reach for the pistol he carried. Didn't make any threatening gesture at all. He just looked up at Schultz with eyes that showed absolutely nothing. No anger. No fear. No reaction to the slur, the insult, the public humiliation. He simply waited for Schultz to finish speaking. When Schultz finally did, Bumpy picked up what remained of his bourbon, drained it slowly, set the glass down with deliberate care, and stood up. He didn't speak. He just walked toward the exit, the crowd parting for him as if proximity to him had become dangerous. Schultz watched him go, still chuckling, still shaking his head at the absurdity. Still convinced he'd won. It was 8:47 p.m. on Monday, September 16, 1935. In exactly 7 days, 8 of Schultz's men would be dead. In exactly 7 days, Schultz would abandon Harlem entirely. In exactly 7 days, the rules of organized crime in New York would be permanently rewritten. But nobody knew that yet. Nobody except Bumpy Johnson, who was walking through the Harlem night, his mind already 3 moves ahead, his plan already taking shape. To understand what was about to happen, you need to understand what Harlem was in 1935. It wasn't the Harlem of movies. It wasn't a slum. It was a kingdom. A black kingdom in the middle of a white city. A place where thousands of people had created something impossible, a functioning economy, a culture, a sense of community despite having absolutely nothing. The lifeblood of that economy was the numbers game. The numbers were simple: you took a penny, a nickel, a dime. You bet it on a 3-digit number. If your number came in, you won 40, 50, maybe 100 times your bet. For people making $7 a week, that penny was hope. That nickel was a chance. That dime was the difference between your child going to bed hungry or eating dinner. It wasn't gambling to the people of Harlem. It was survival. It was mathematics applied to desperation. By the 1930s, the numbers racket was generating millions of dollars every year. Millions that stayed in Harlem. Millions that circulated through the community, that paid for rent, that paid for food, that paid for dreams. A brilliant black woman named Madame Stephanie St. Clair, they called her the Queen of Numbers, had built this system from nothing. She'd made it work. She'd protected it. She'd turned it into something that mattered. By 1935, Bumpy Johnson was her enforcer. He was the man who made sure it stayed hers. Dutch Schultz looked at all those millions flowing through Harlem, and he decided they should be his. He'd already muscled in on black-run numbers operations in other parts of the city. He'd used the same formula every time: bring in white men with guns, intimidate the local operators, take over, and keep 90% of the profits. It had worked everywhere else. Why wouldn't it work in Harlem? The only problem was Bumpy Johnson. Schultz had tried sending enforcers. Bumpy sent them back in ambulances. He'd tried offering money. Bumpy told him Harlem wasn't for sale. He'd tried using corrupt police. Bumpy had better connections. By September 1935, Schultz was desperate. Desperate men make dangerous decisions. They abandon patience. They start believing that public humiliation will solve problems that have resisted everything else. So Schultz went to the Cotton Club, got himself drunk on expensive whiskey, and decided to teach Bumpy Johnson a lesson in front of 200 witnesses. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. Bumpy walked through Harlem streets after leaving the Cotton Club. West 139th Street. His apartment. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he spent 4 hours thinking. Most men would have responded to Schultz's humiliation with immediate violence. They would have gone looking for Dutch. They would have tried to kill him, tried to start a war, tried to reassert their dignity through force. Bumpy wasn't most men. He understood something fundamental that Schultz had forgotten: you don't beat your enemy by fighting him directly. You beat him by making him beat himself. You beat him by turning his plan into your victory. You beat him by understanding that the real power isn't the man with the most guns. It's the man who understands how systems work. The plan that took shape in Bumpy's mind that night had 3 essential elements. Starting immediately, Bumpy would disappear from public view. His policy banks would close temporarily. His visible operations would cease. He would go to ground so completely that Schultz's men couldn't find him to retaliate. This would serve 2 purposes. It would protect him from the inevitable counterattack. And it would create the impression that Schultz's public threat had scared him into hiding. It would make Schultz complacent. Careless. Convinced that he'd already won. Bumpy wouldn't try to kill Schultz directly. That would be tactically difficult. Schultz was too well protected, and strategically counterproductive. If Bumpy killed Schultz, the entire Italian mob would respond. They would see it as a colored criminal overstepping acceptable bounds. They would move against Harlem with overwhelming force. But if Bumpy killed the 8 men who actually ran Schultz's Harlem operation, the collectors, the enforcers, the policy bank managers, Schultz's entire operation would collapse without triggering a mob war. The infrastructure would fail. The money would stop flowing. Schultz would be forced to choose: invest massive resources into rebuilding, or cut his losses and leave. This couldn't be about just driving Schultz out of Harlem. This had to be about establishing a principle that would govern future interactions between white gangsters and black gangsters. That disrespecting a colored criminal carried severe consequences. That using racial slurs, that assuming white superiority, that publicly humiliating a black man in his own neighborhood, all of that would cost something. The cost had to be clear enough, brutal enough, that future white gangsters would think very carefully before attempting it. The message had to be so clear that they would understand: respect isn't optional. It's a matter of survival. By 5:30 a.m. Tuesday morning, Bumpy had finalized the details. He'd identified his 8 targets. He'd arranged surveillance. He'd selected the men who would carry out each killing. Everything was prepared. At 6 a.m., Bumpy climbed into a car and disappeared. For the next 7 days, nobody outside his immediate circle would see him. Dutch Schultz would spend the entire week searching for him. Would offer substantial money for information about his location. Would threaten and intimidate people throughout Harlem, desperate to find the man who'd promised to kill his operators. But Bumpy had become a ghost. Present in the systematic executions of Schultz's men. Invisible to the people trying to find him. Tuesday morning, 6:23 a.m. Sanitation worker James Robertson found the garbage drum behind the warehouse on West 145th Street. He opened it to see why it was so heavy. He discovered Vincent Clutch Mel, 38 years old, one of Dutch Schultz's most effective policy collectors in central Harlem. Mel had been tortured for hours. His fingers were systematically broken, every single one, crushed with a hammer while he screamed and begged, tried to explain that he was just doing his job, that he had nothing personal against Johnson, that he was sorry. His face had been beaten. Nose broken. Jaw broken. Teeth missing. Eyes closed with swelling. His body bore 11 ice pick wounds, stab wounds that caused tremendous pain without immediately killing. Wounds spaced out over an hour, each one making him whimper, making him plead, making him understand that this was going to end in death but not quickly. Finally, his throat had been cut. Cut deep. Deep enough that the blade scraped against vertebrae, nearly severing his head from his body. Pinned to Mel's shirt with a straight pin was a note written in block letters with pencil on ordinary paper. The kind of note that couldn't be traced to any specific person. 1 down, 7 to go. Leave Harlem. By 9 a.m., word had spread through New York's underworld. Vincent Mel was dead. He'd been tortured for hours before being killed. A note promised 7 more deaths. Dutch Schultz heard the news while eating breakfast at his Bronx headquarters. Initially dismissed it, probably unrelated to the Cotton Club confrontation. Then he learned about the note. He understood that Bumpy Johnson had meant what he said. The 7-day deadline wasn't posturing. It was a promise. It was a countdown. Schultz's reaction was rage. Orders to find Bumpy immediately. Threats. Demands for information about his location. But Bumpy had disappeared. His apartment was empty. His policy banks were closed. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody could provide information to Schultz. Not because they didn't know. Because they wouldn't tell. What was happening wasn't just violence. It was something far more sophisticated. It was psychological warfare designed to break Schultz's confidence in his own safety, his own judgment, his own power. Every day brought a new body. Every day brought a new note. Every day, Schultz's assumption that he controlled Harlem was challenged by the reality that he couldn't even find the man taking his people apart. Wednesday morning, another envelope arrived at Schultz's Bronx headquarters. 1 down, 7 to go. Your collector is dead because you disrespected us. The next one dies today. Pull out of Harlem or keep counting bodies. At 2:15 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, Raymond Red Sullivan's body was discovered in an abandoned building on Lenox Avenue. Shot once in the back of the head. Execution style. His 2 bodyguards, assigned to protect him after Mel's death, were found nearby. Both shot multiple times in what appeared to be a brief gunfight they'd lost decisively. The note, 2 down, 6 to go. Thursday brought another envelope. 2 down, 6 to go. Every day you stay in Harlem, another one of your people dies. How many bodies will it take before you understand? Leave now. At 9:40 p.m. Wednesday, technically early Thursday morning, Thomas Little Tommy Brennan was found in his apartment. Stabbed 17 times with an ice pick. Killed in the same methodical torture style that had characterized Mel's death. The note: 3 down, 5 to go. Last chance to leave. By Thursday afternoon, Schultz wasn't dismissive anymore. He was frightened. Genuinely frightened in a way he'd never experienced before in his criminal career. 3 of his key Harlem operators were dead in 3 days. Killed with precision that suggested careful planning and capability that Schultz hadn't anticipated. The notes kept coming. Kept counting down. Kept reminding him that 5 more deaths were promised unless he withdrew completely from Harlem. Thursday evening brought another envelope. 3 down, 5 to go. The next one dies tomorrow, then 4 more after that. Or you can pull out of Harlem today and nobody else has to die. Your choice. Schultz called an emergency meeting with his top lieutenants. Told them to find Bumpy regardless of cost. To kill him and everyone associated with him. To burn down Harlem if necessary. But finding Bumpy remained impossible. And Schultz's remaining Harlem operators were terrified. They understood that 5 of them were still on the list. That 5 more bodies were coming unless Schultz gave up Harlem entirely. Friday brought 2 more deaths. Anthony Little Tony Benedetto was beaten to death in an alley. Found with broken bones and internal injuries that suggested hours of brutal assault. Joseph Joey Numbers Catalano was shot in the face in a crowded restaurant while dozens of witnesses watched. 2 colored men walked in calmly, executed him, and walked out before anyone could react. The notes: 4 down, 4 to go. Then, 5 down, 3 to go. Leave now or die. And Friday evening, another envelope at Schultz's headquarters. This one longer than the previous notes. This one spelling out exactly why these killings were happening. 5 down, 3 to go. You want to know why your people are dying? Because you disrespected us. You came into our neighborhood, called us names, told us we're too stupid to run our own operations, treated us like we're nothing. You thought being white made you superior. You thought we'd just accept your insults and submit like good coloreds. You were wrong. Get out of Harlem. Never come back. Don't ever disrespect black brothers again. The message was clear. This wasn't business. This wasn't territory. This was about teaching a man that there were boundaries. That there were consequences. That you could take everything from a black gangster except one thing: his dignity. Schultz spent Friday night in a state of near panic. Saturday morning brought Harold Bunny Weinstein, one of Schultz's top lieutenants coordinating the Harlem operation. Found shot in the back of the head in his car on West 47th Street in Midtown Manhattan. Killed in broad daylight in one of the busiest parts of the city. The note: 6 down, 2 to go. 2 left. Just 2. Patrick O'Brien, Schultz's last remaining Harlem operator, spent Saturday in a safe house in the Bronx. Protected by 4 armed guards. Barricaded inside. Convinced that if he could just survive until Sunday, if he could just make it one more day, he might live. At 8:47 p.m. Sunday evening, a woman knocked on the door. She claimed to have the wrong apartment. When a guard opened the door, she threw a gasoline bomb inside. The apartment erupted in flames. The guards ran for the back exit and were immediately cut down by shotgun fire from men waiting in the alley. O'Brien tried to escape through a window but was shot before he could climb through, his body falling back into the burning apartment. When firefighters extinguished the blaze and recovered O'Brien's badly burned corpse, they found a note partially burned but still legible. 8 down, 0 to go. Harlem belongs to Harlem. Don't ever disrespect black brothers. Leave and never come back. Monday morning, September 23, 1935. Exactly 7 days after the Cotton Club. Dutch Schultz received his final message from Bumpy Johnson. 8 of your men are dead. They died because you made a choice to disrespect me in public. To call me names in front of hundreds of people. To treat colored gangsters like we're inferior to white criminals. You thought I was bluffing when I said your people would die. You laughed at me. I wasn't bluffing. Your 8 dead men prove that. You have 24 hours to close every operation you have in Harlem. After that, I start killing your people everywhere. Not just Harlem. The Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan. 1 per day until you're completely out of our neighborhood. This isn't about money or territory anymore. This is about respect. This is about teaching you and every other white gangster in New York that you can't disrespect black brothers without paying a price. That price is 8 bodies so far. It'll be more if you don't leave. Get out. Stay out. And remember what it cost you when you forgot that colored gangsters deserve the same respect you demand for yourself. Bumpy Johnson. By Tuesday evening, every one of Dutch Schultz's Harlem operations had been shut down. He'd pulled his people out completely. Abandoned 18 months of work and substantial investment. Retreated from Harlem rather than continue losing men to an opponent who demonstrated the capability and the will to kill indefinitely. The Italian mob was stunned. Lucky Luciano himself called an emergency meeting. The bosses gathered, expecting Schultz to demand support for a massive retaliation against Harlem. Instead, Schultz announced he was withdrawing completely. The cost, he said simply, is too high. What spread through New York's underworld wasn't just another story of bloodshed. Violence was common. What stunned everyone was the method. The precision. The inevitability. Bumpy Johnson hadn't simply fought Dutch Schultz, he had dismantled him, piece by piece, using Schultz's own arrogance as the weapon. White gangsters quickly learned the lesson. Harlem wasn't dangerous because of guns, everyone had guns. It was dangerous because Bumpy understood something deeper: power wasn't just force. It was psychology. It was respect. And it was the loyalty of a community that refused to be ruled by contempt. After Schultz's men were systematically removed, 8 bodies in 7 days sent a message no one misunderstood. Harlem would not be taken. Not by intimidation. Not by money. Not by outsiders who failed to understand the people who lived there. Bumpy could have chosen open war. He could have gone after Schultz directly. But that would have been predictable, and costly. Instead, he vanished. For 7 days, Schultz searched for an enemy he couldn't find while his organization collapsed around him. Fear replaced confidence. Uncertainty replaced control. Every hour without answers increased the pressure until retreat became the only option left. This was Bumpy's genius. He knew that in a fight against a stronger system, you don't attack the system head-on. You attack what makes it function. You make the cost of staying higher than the cost of leaving. When Schultz finally pulled out of Harlem, the balance of power shifted permanently. Bumpy consolidated control over the numbers operation, building systems that would last for decades. But more importantly, he established a principle that would define Harlem's future: this neighborhood belongs to its people. That principle echoed years later. In 1946, when Lucky Luciano wanted access to Harlem's operation, he didn't arrive as a conqueror. He arrived as an equal. He negotiated. He showed respect. The meeting marked a turning point, proof that a black gangster could sit at the table with the Italian mob on equal footing. Everything traced back to those 7 days in September 1935. Dutch Schultz had believed power came from money and guns. That belief cost him everything. What he failed to understand was that Bumpy possessed something money couldn't buy: community loyalty. Harlem protected Bumpy not out of fear, but because he had protected Harlem first. People didn't hide him because they were scared. They hid him because Schultz represented something worse: outside control, exploitation, and disrespect. Bumpy Johnson lived another 33 years. He negotiated with legends. He protected figures like Malcolm X. He built an empire. But his legacy was sealed in that single week, not through brute force, but through strategy. He proved that real power isn't about violence. It's about shaping a situation so completely that your enemy's choices disappear. So every move leads to the same outcome. So defeat comes not from being overpowered, but from being outthought. That's why they called him the Godfather of Harlem. Not because he was the most violent man in the room, but because he was the smartest.